And it's time for the long-awaited return of the 2022 UFC Hall of Fame. He joined the fight wing for his fight in 2016 at UFC 206 against Cub Swanson, the Korean Superboy Ho Choi, when he takes on the Muskokan monster Kyle Nelson, representing House of Champions, Niagara Top Team, and Muskoka Martial Arts. That's his own gym, brother. And Nelson. And for Kyle Nelson in the UFC, it's been a rough run. He lost to Carlos Diego Ferreira on incredibly short notice at 155 pounds, UFC 231 back 4 years ago.
So no shame in that loss. I think we can both agree on that.
He lost to Matt Sales by submission about 3.5 years ago. He goes out there and beats Polo Reyes and looks really good in that one. Hits him with a body shot. Loses to Billy Quarantillo. And then he lost to Jai Herbert his last time out. Now, positive out of Kyle Nelson's last fight. Great leg kicks at the start of it. And really did slow down Herbert until the boxing started to progress. But the big story in this fight, folks, is Ho Choi and the fact that his last 3 fights have all been fight of the nights. Runaway consensus fight of the year in 2016 against Cub Swanson. A 2-round fight of the night against Jeremy Stephens. He gets finished in the second round. A 2-round fight of the night against Charles Jourdain. I'll throw the clip up out there about the video we did on Ho Choi and Charles Jourdain, because it's been so long ago. That was over 3 years ago when he fought Jourdain at UFC Fight Night Busan. And if you consider it for Choi, he's had so many injuries. So I had to really try and dig through the weeds to see what all he hurt. He broke his arm in the fight against Charles Jourdain, had to get a plate and screws in there. And then if I'm not mistaken, he got the plate and screws removed. But he had to get his arm fixed up. Then he did an interview at JHK with, it was South China Morning Post. And in that one he said, so due to the mandatory military service that he was supposed to do, everything was kind of in limbo before the Jourdain fight. So he could only fight in Korea. If he was to take a fight outside, he'd be in trouble. So he could only fight in Korea. The UFC was coming. So he had to fight. And that was the only way he could make any money. So he took the fight. And he tore his ACL before the fight. And he still took it anyway. And then he broke his arm. And then I started to read, and I took his characters in Korean. I put them on the internet. I started to read, go through the weeds. And then I realized, okay, he's had like a major eye injury. So then I tried to dig through it again. I reached out to JHK, and then he sent me the interview. And in the interview, he says, okay, do you have an eye condition? Now, the guy that translates from Korean to English doesn't happen to be JHK. He could have done it anyway. But the translator for the Korean Superboy says it was the thinning of the retina. Now, what he has is called keratoconus, and to me, I looked it up, it's the thinning of the cornea, but basically your eye starts to thin and then you get blurry vision. Now, he said before the fight that he was supposed to have a couple summers ago, he was supposed to fight Danny Chavez, but then he had to pull out of it. It seems like the eye might have been the issue, but he's had eye issues, he's had his arm broken, he hurt his ACL, and now after 3 years away, he's coming into this fight. And it's not because of mandatory military service, because he was able to be exempt from that. So Matt, Ho Choi hasn't won a fight since 2016. The last time Choi won a fight, I Need a One Dance. That was the #1 song in the world. The #1 movie, Secret Life of Pets, the first one. So Ho Choi doesn't have a win over a current UFC fighter, but neither does Kyle Nelson. His wins over Polo Reyes. So nobody's going to win over a current UFC fighter.
Yet it's an exciting fight, though. Like, this isn't a bad fight by any means, even though their records might suggest otherwise. I do worry about all the things with Ho Choi, but think about, like, Justin Gaethje. Justin Gaethje became World Series of Fighting champion while basically being blind, gets eye surgery, now he can see, and he's, like, really good now. So I just think with Michael Bisping, couldn't see out of one of his eyes, and then won a UFC title. I'm not discounting the point. I just mean, for some fighters, they've somehow been able to get over that hurdle. So we'll be interested to see how Ho Choi deals with all of those injuries, because this is going to sound really rude, but this is how I'm going to make my point. Ho Choi was a better fighter than Kyle Nelson ever was. Like, Ho Choi's prime, he was a really talented fighter in the featherweight division. Someone who was one of the hottest prospects, who was genuinely thought of as a guy who could really go out there and beat anybody in the rankings, especially after that fight with Cub Swanson. Now, he lost a lot of himself, and I think that's fair to say, in that Cub Swanson fight. And he had a really quick turnaround against Jeremy Stephens, probably too quick, and of course he gets finished again in that one. I worry about how much tread he has left on the tires because of all the injuries and whatnot, But if Ho Choi's even 70% of the fighter that he was in his prime, I think he can beat Kyle Nelson. Like, if he still has the power and the accuracy that he used to have, I think he can knock Kyle Nelson out. Now, is he going to be able to have the longevity, the cardio, kind of the grittiness that you need from in-cage time? Those things are yet to be seen because it, like you said, it's been 3 years. There's a lot of things that have changed in those 3 years, and primarily it has been injuries for Choi. I just keep on thinking, if Choi looks even a little bit like the fighter he used to be, I think he could have success in this matchup.
And before watching any of the tape, before going into the weeds about injuries and interviews, because interviews for both guys, yeah, I pick Ho Choi. Sure, I pick him I pick him 9 times out of 10. Sure, 100%. But all the layoff, all the injuries, and the fact that Kyle Nelson, what's the part of his game that we don't get to see enough in the UFC? It's his wrestling. His wrestling is pretty good. Now, he's been out-wrestled by guys like Billy Quarantillo, but he's a pretty damn good wrestler up around the rankings in this division. So you look at it for Nelson, his last fight was at lightweight when he took on Jai Herbert, but he's known about this fight for a really long time. I listened to an interview that he did with All Access MMA and James Lynch, and originally this fight and this entire card was supposed to be in Seoul, South Korea. So Kyle Nelson gets 1 ticket for himself and 1 ticket for a corner from the UFC, and then he goes, you know what? Well, my fiance is going to be in my corner, and I need 1 more corner, so I just had them handle it, and they booked me another 2 tickets. And then the fight got moved to Vegas, and those are non-refundable tickets. So what a kick in the dick that one is. Now, sounds like you got credits on those airline tickets, but that sucks. The UFC should pay for more corners. I think that's fair. Also, he said the cut to 145 pounds this time around is the best cut of his life because he's had 2.5 months to prepare for the cut. It wasn't like it was short notice. A lot of his... No. A lot of his fights were short notice before.
I just always get concerned when a guy says he's in the best shape of his life or this is the best weight cut of my life.
I did just realize Ho Choi representing Korean Zombie MMA, and I have the shirt from earlier on in the show, so I'll zip that one up. But he also said, and these were in his own words, Kyle Nelson's words, look forward to the challenge of standing with him. Now, he did say before that in the interview that he definitely has a wrestling advantage, and I also believe he has a wrestling advantage. You train at Niagara Top Team with guys like Aaron Jeffrey and Anthony Romero, that's going to work that wrestling. That's a great gym for that aspect. I mean, Jasmine Jazz Divisius trains out of that gym, and look what she's been able to do with her wrestling in MMA. But again, like the leg kicks are good out of Kyle Nelson, the wrestling's good. If you can bring those together in a matchup, his hands are nowhere near Ho Choi's, or what I've seen out of Ho Choi years ago. So for me, it is a tough fight. The best Ho Choi beats Kyle Nelson, sure. I don't know what version of Ho Choi I'm going to get. So for that reason, it's a pot and popcorn fight for me. But it is tricky that way. You don't know what you're going to get.
You certainly don't, because Kyle Nelson is the more well-rounded fighter. But the problem is, he likes to play in the wheelhouse of a Ho Choi. And power's the last thing to go. I don't care how many injuries you've had. I don't care if he's 31. I don't care if he's 41. Ho Choi has incredible power if he's able to land at this weight class. Like at 145, not a lot of guys can absorb his power shots and continue to throw. I know Cub Swanson was able to do it, but he has one of the all-time great chins. And Charles Jourdain dropped him, and he dropped him back. Like, that was a great back-and-forth fight. I feel like this is a trapdoor fight, though. Like, because, exactly like you said, when you first look at the matchup, it's, Ho Choi without a doubt is probably going to win this fight. But then you remember just how long it's been since he has been in his prime, and that there's a lot of question marks up in your head, but I still think I have to pick Ho Choi at the end of the day, just because I remember the fighter that he once was, and I think he can get back to, maybe not 100% of that, but he's not 35, he's not 36, he's not 37, like Ho Choi is still only 31 years old.
And he's more than a 2-1 favorite in the matchup, and he was so against Charles Jourdain. I had Jourdain that fight for the fact that Choi, again, took so much damage in those 2 fights. Now we're 3 years removed, he's been able to kind of work through a lot of those injuries. The eye condition does scare me, but you do consider, we have a look at the Topology votes. They're a surprise to us, they are to you. I'm going to say over-under. It's probably kind of silly, but I'm going to say over-under 85% Choi.
I think it'll be under.
It's over. 993 total votes, 87% Choi, 71% by knockout for the 13% that have Nelson, 39% by decision, 46% by knockout. So from 3 years ago, I took a Canadian to beat Ho Choi in Busan. Ho Choi is from Busan, and I took Jourdain to get the win. He got a performance bonus there. But I'm not taking a Canadian this time. I hate the cut to 145 for Kyle Nelson, no matter how good he claims it is. I think this fight being in the States, it favors Kyle Nelson a bit. But for me, I do like the hand speed out of Choi. I do like the punching power and the range and varied attack that he can throw on the feet. So I'll take Choi in this one. But again, pop and popcorn fight, life for a Korean Zombie guy. I'll go Choi here.
Yeah, I hate it when guys say I'm in the best shape of my life or this is the best weight cut of my life. So you're saying all the other ones have been terrible up until this point? Like, you just figured it out at the age of 31? What, 18 fights into your career? Like, I just think that's always a silly thing to say no matter what. I do Ho Choi. I kind of tipped my hand a little bit earlier before we did the Tapology votes. But again, I think if he can get back to 75%, 80% of the fighter that he once was, that's still a pretty darn good fighter. And I still think just him stylistically offers Kyle Nelson a lot of problems.
We see the big reset for one of these fighters, both on lengthy losing streaks. Both of us going with the oft-injured Korean Superboy, Ho Choi, to get the win in the matchup. Let us know down below in the comments section. Should we have gone with our fellow Canadian and Nelson? We got some big-time fights left on this card that you're not going to want to miss. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.